In a cellar below a villa, an older-looking man in checkered trousers and a bow tie is being prepared for an experiment. When the process finished, the older had obtained a pair of orange brushy eyebrows, a couple of warts and taste of human flesh. Later on, he and another man with the same features enter a Spanish restaurant. The scene cuts to the man who had a name called Shocky stabs the restaurant owner and the event starts getting blurring. The doctor wakes up suddenly from his chair and rubbed his hands on his face. He was having flashes of his previous lives again, and that time in Seville kept coming up again. What Dasturi did to him left with some psychological trauma buried in his mind, and it's only recently that these memories start cropping up. He headed to the console and checked the scanner, still flying through the vortex. He walked over to a small box filled with 45s and picked one out. He put it on the turntable and placed the needle. The song started. Then the doctor realized what was playing. The 1970 song Timothy by the Boys. He quickly took it off the turntable and thrown it onto the TARDIS floor, breaking it into pieces. He started to think he was going mad and sat back down in his chair. Louisa came into the console room a little later and asked if he was okay. The doctor shrugged it off, said he was okay, and headed to the console again, looking at the scanner. She leaned on the console next to him. She knew nothing wasn't right with him and tapped his arm. She asked something's wrong, and the doctor tried to quietly distract himself, but Louisa gave him an uncomfortable stare. Before he can say anything, the TARDIS started rumbling and the doctor started to push buttons and pulled a couple levers. The TARDIS landed and he looked at the scanner. What came on the screen was stone walls and torch lights. Louisa questioned if they've landed in a castle in the Middle Ages. The doctor says they haven't landed on Earth and will be an alien planet due to the coordinates being shown on the scanner. He says to her that they'll have a look round, and Louisa followed him out the doors. The place looked empty. Hay was on the ground and the doctor wondered if it's a dungeon of some kind. Louisa wasn't sure herself. All she can hear was the dripping water and then stood on something hard that made a crunch sound. She looked down and noticed it was something decayed. The doctor had a look and said it was a piece of bone. Louisa got a little shivering feeling from that reveal and followed the doctor with torch in hand through the walled corridors. Louisa saw a window and looked through it. She called the doctor over. What was beyond the window was an ocean covered in a grey mist, and Louisa thinks it's a sort of Alcatraz-type prison. The doctor himself wasn't sure himself, and before he say something relevant, the sound of a door nearby. The doctor carefully walked to where the sound was. He pointed the torch forward, and then a being covered in crimson robes head to toe with only the eyes being exposed appeared out of the darkness. The doctor gave a faint hello and the crimson-robed being exchanged the welcome. It offered them to head up to the banquet area. The doctor agreed to this and Louisa pensively just nodded her head. They head up to where the banquet area where preparations were underway. Various beings in the same robes were being seated and the crimson-robed being announced their arrival. The doctor and Louisa were seated at a long wooden table. One of the beings clanged a little chime bell and then a small line of robed maidens came in with trays of food. What was presented was large scaly serpents which were size of a boar. Severed heads that looked ancient with the top of their skulls removed, revealing exposed brain and a large silver bowl with steam coming out of it. Another clang of the chime bell echoed the banquet area and the robed said that they will be being to feast. Then the beings removed their robes from their faces, revealing their true identities, and the doctor gave a gasp-like look. Bushy eyebrows, faces scattered with warts and sharp contorted yellowish brown teeth. They were androgams and the doctor quickly leaned back his chair. His turned pale like he'd seen an actual ghost and became tense. Louisa was observing a silver bowl. Inside was either a soup of a broth, but when she put her spoon in it, eyeballs started to bob up to the surface and she let out a quick but feeble gasp in horror. She turned to the doctor. He said to her that they need to get out of her and that they'll be on the menu later on. She quickly turned to an oldish androgam who was staring at her. It dribbled and its face was twitching continuously. Her eyes widened and clenched the doctor's wrist in terror. The other androgams, who still eating ferociously at the food, then turned their attention to the doctor and Louisa. They slowly started picking sharp cutlery and began to point them at the two. The doctor quickly held Louisa's chair and forcefully pushed the chairs back with the strength of his back to the floor. Louisa let out another gasp, but this time it was louder and landed on their backs. They quickly tried to escape but were restrained by two of the androgams. Some of them leapt onto the table making a screaming chant and said that they've got more food supplies for their midnight feast. They knocked the doctor and Louisa out with long dry bones. They dragged the doctor to an area below and they lynched him up with rope. Thankfully no rope was placed round his neck. They wanted to keep him alive but only for now, and was placed next to someone else with a sack of its head. The doctor awoke from his unconscious state and looked at the one with the sack on his head. His name was Harkle and he was an investigator sent by the planet's government. The planet's called Lorelei and this place is an isolated hold for the androgams. No escape from the hold as the planet's ocean is treacherous with large creatures that can gulp a transporter in one hole. Harkle mumbly explains that the androgams were imprisoned because of a horrific event involving one of them eating the planet's ambassador's newborn baby while it was still breathing. Louisa meanwhile was in a kitchen area where some androgam maidens were circling her. One of them gently unbuttoned her shirt and then removed her bra. Another one approached her and said to her that they are going to check to see if she's tender enough to eat. The androgam maiden leaned forward, strongly placed her hand over Louisa's mouth and bit into her right breast with those sharp contorted teeth. Louisa squealed like a helpless pig and then the teeth got let go. An androgam called Sharkan walks in, heads over to the doctor and pulls out a small cutlass. The doctor jokes if he's asking for a duel, but Sharkan just cackled at this and started slitting the doctor's left wrist. He winced at this and kept quiet. Sharkan started to lick it and got an immediate high from it. He smacked his lips and gave an aroused reaction. The taste of blood from a Time Lord and proceeded to have some more. The doctor jerked back and kicked Sharkan back with his 2 feet. Sharkan fell to the floor and the doctor managed to set himself free from the rope. He headed to the stairs. Blood was dripping from his left wrist, leaving little splotches on the ground, and locked the door behind, leaving Sharkan imprisoned. Sharkan came to his feet and was more interested in the patches of blood on the ground. He jabbed his fingers into it and got a high from it. The taste of the gods, as he puts it. Harkle shouted for him to free him. The doctor realized this and quickly returned back down below. But then the shouting stopped and then gurgled groans came out. The doctor leaned around a corner and watched Sharkan disembowel Harkle with the cutlass. The doctor hid behind the corner feeling grieved. It was all his fault. He could have saved him first after he'd escaped, but left him in the hand of a wretched cannibal and now he's their food. He returned back to the surface and to save Louisa. Louisa was being lifted on a large wooden board by the androgam maidens. They covered her body in slices of meats and roasted plant life. Before being served, they started to throw seasoning all over her. Some of it landed on her face and a few specks went into her eyes. It started to become painful, like she'd been maced, but in an organic way, and she shouted out that her eyes were burning. They placed her on the long wooden table. The other androgams were drooling rapidly at her and were seizing the chance to sever a piece of her flesh. She was flickering her as the seasoning was still affecting her eyesight, making it difficult to see what was going, and knew her fate was coming. The doctor sneakily headed to a balcony looming over the banquet area and quickly tried to think how to prevent Louisa from getting feasted on. The androgams were prepping to chow down, and before the bell chime would ring, the doctor swooped in, holding tightly to a long curtain. He let a loud manly scream until he lost his grip and fell face first onto the wooden table. The androgams then started to jab the doctor with their cutlery. One of them had the audacity to use a spoon to whack him on the head, and as they tried, they couldn't keep the doctor down. He quickly picked Louisa up in his arms and in retaliation kicked some of them in face with his foot. He quickly headed to the door and managed to get out. He then breached it so it can give him time to get back the TARDIS and contain them for a brief time. He brought Louisa back to the TARDIS and placed near the console. Suddenly Sharkan appeared out of nowhere and wrestled the doctor. The doctor managed to get Sharkan off him and forcefully pushed out of the TARDIS. Sharkan got his cutlass out again and tried to slash the doctor. The doctor then quickly slammed the TARDIS door into Sharkan's face, knocking him out, and quickly entered back in. The TARDIS dematerialized and left a small cosmic behind. Later on, Louisa, having been healed and cleaned, came up to him while he was sat in the chair. She said can't sleep alone after what happened. Without asking, she climbs onto him and cuddles into him for comfort. The doctor didn't say anything. He only sipped his glass of brandy and listened into Brian Eno's Apollo album that was playing on the turntable. He stroked her hair to make her comfortable. She then said to him if he encountered the androgams before. The doctor bluntly said that he was turned into one, and then Louisa jolted up. The doctor explained to her about the events in Seville and how he was kidnapped to be a part of a genetic experiment for a brief time. Louisa looked up at him and a gave-out smile. She pinched his chin and said he's always be him whatever happens. He gave a little smirk and proceeded to sip some more brandy. She lay back with her head on his chest and drifted off to sleep. The doctor was deep in thought. Never in his time he would have encountered those cannibals again, and yet he had done after a long time. But that's time for you. He swigged back the last of the brandy and sat back as the TARDIS was traveling through the vortex.